Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Random Rewatch. This is your host, Mike. Thank you for joining me into another dive into the dusty discount bins of cinematic history. The premise here is simple. I grab a movie, one that maybe I haven't watched in a long time, and I try to look at it with fresh eyes and figure out what was it trying to say. Was it ahead of its time, or was it just a mess? Today we are packing our bags, pressurizing our suits, and heading to a place where Hollywood was absolutely obsessed with at the turn of the century. And we are talking about Mars, and we are talking about Red Planet.
The hope and survival of mankind rests on us, because the best scientific minds are going there to figure out the answer.
Did you find a good parking space?
Gamma burst.
Latch up. Shut it down now. Some kind of massive solar flare. Come on.
Level 5 EMP.
Launch.
Oh, man.
This is Mars 1 ground crew. Do you copy? Hello, we're the guys on Mars.
What's that?
Commander, there is a disturbance on the surface of Mars.
God help us.
So when I say obsessed, this is because there was a bunch of movies that came out in the early 2000s talking about Mars. And for instance, this one, Mission to Mars, John Carter. Before we get into it, I want to talk about this phenomenon that was happening in like the mid to late 90s and early 2000s of twin films. And that is movies that were created about the same time, about roughly the same subject, and almost seemed to be like kind of parallels. And you know, this goes back all the way through movie history, all the way back to 1920, where you had two Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde movies. In 1939, you had Young Mr. Lincoln and Abe Lincoln in Illinois. 1965, you had The Magnificent Men and Their Flying Machines and The Great Race. 1989, you had K-9 and Turner and Hooch. But getting into the mid-90s, like you had Tombstone in 1993, Wyatt Earp in 1994, you had Braveheart and Rob Roy in 1995. You had Tornado and Twister in 1996. You had The Arrival and Contact in 1997. Executive Decision in 96. Air Force One in 97. Dante's Peak and Volcano in 1997. Murder at 1600 and Absolute Power in 1997. Ants and a Bug's Life in 1998. And of course, Deep Impact and Armageddon in 1998, but then you had Mission to Mars and our movie Red Planet in the year 2000. These are two very different Mars movies, to be sure, but obviously it was kind of a thing, and sometimes these movies are like, one studio hears that this other studio is doing a movie about we're doing a movie about an asteroid, we got to do a movie about an asteroid, stuff like that. And sometimes it's just scripts get shopped around and somebody passes on a script but likes the idea, so they start to develop a similar script in their own studio system. For whatever the reasons are, we had two Mars movies in the year 2000. And Mission to Mars is kind of more cerebral and more of a sci-fi drama. And this is kind of more of a sci-fi action adventure movie. So I decided I'm going to go with this one. I mean, I remember seeing this movie back when it was in the theaters, and I was like, yeah, it was fine. You know, I'm a big sci-fi fan, so I was really kind of looking forward to it. It's remembered as being a pretty big bomb. It was a career killer for some people, especially Val Kilmer. It really changed the trajectory of his career, especially because he had a reputation for being very difficult to work with. We'll talk about that later. Carrie-Ann Moss obviously was, at the time, fresh off The Matrix, and she was one of the hottest stars in Hollywood. We'll talk about that when we get into characters and casting. This story originated from a pitch by a writer named Chuck Farah. He's an interesting guy. Former Navy SEAL turned screenwriter, wrote movies like, shocker here, Navy SEALs, Hard Target, Virus. He's an action guy. He teamed up with Jonathan Lemkin, who worked on Lethal Weapon 4 and The Devil's Advocate, and they sat down to bang out a script. So this is not, unlike Mission to Mars, this is not like an existential aliens kind of movie, spoiler alert, but this is more kind of a hard sci-fi. There's an ecological crisis on Earth. We are out looking for alternatives in order to save our planet and save our civilization. And we wind up here on Mars. There's a problem, and they have to send a team out to figure out what's going on. And this is where this movie is going to take us. It is not man versus alien, it's man versus the environment, mostly. So as far as the director goes, the film is directed by Anthony Hoffman. This is his first feature film. He was a very highly respected commercial director. Super Bowl spots, Budweiser campaigns. He was known for having a really amazing visual eye. And that's great, but a $70-80 million sci-fi spectacular as your first gig, that is a lot of pressure. And by the way, it is the only feature film that Hoffman has ever directed. But he was surrounded with some really, really qualified expertise people. The cinematographer was a guy named I'm going to pronounce this wrong, Peter Shatitsky. If you don't know the name, you probably know the work. He is David Cronenberg's go-to guy. He shot Dead Ringers, Naked Lunch, Crash, Eastern Promises, and this little film that you may have heard of. We might have mentioned it once or twice on the main podcast called The Empire Strikes Back. So he knows how to create scale and isolation and atmosphere. They filmed the movie in a place called Wadi Rum, Jordan, which is where they filmed Lawrence of Arabia, which is where they would go to film The Martian and Dune. It is often used as a stand-in for alien planets and for Mars. The music was done by Graham Revell. He scored The Crow, From Dusk Till Dawn, Pitch Black. He's got a very cool style that blends like orchestral arrangements with electronic music and tribal sounds. This is a really good score. It's very dynamic. It conveys like the openness and the majesty of space, but also in the survival scenes and the action scenes, there's like this frantic energy to it. I got to tell you, the music is probably one of the strongest elements of the film. All right, so let's dive into it. So the backdrop for this whole thing is this mission that they are on, and the entire situation is outlined in an opening voiceover, which is done over the credits by Carrie-Ann Moss.
We had begun to overpopulate, pollute, and poison our planet faster than we could clean it up. We ignored the problem for as long as we could, but we were kidding ourselves. By 2025, we knew we were in trouble and began to desperately search for a new home: Mars. For the last 20 years, we've been sending unmanned probes with algae, bioengineered to grow there and produce oxygen. We're going to build ourselves an atmosphere we can breathe. And for 20 years, it seemed to work. It looked like we pulled it off. We'd done it. Then, all of a sudden, oxygen levels started to drop. We don't know why.
So Carrie-Ann Moss, at the time, as I said, is probably one of the hottest actors in Hollywood at the moment. She had just come off The Matrix, where she created this, what will become an iconic role of Trinity. And she was also about to star in Christopher Nolan's Memento. So we have our situation set up. There's an ecological crisis on Earth. We have, ironically, it's 2025, and we have kind of run Earth into the ground and used up its resources. We have started to seed Mars with algae, which is supposed to generate oxygen. In other words, we're terraforming Mars. But at some point, the oxygen levels dropped, and so they need to actually send a team to Mars to figure out what's going on and what's happening. So she kind of, in her voiceover and in the first few minutes, we kind of walk through our characters. We have Lieutenant Ted Stanton, who is played by Benjamin Bratt, who has been, at this point, in a long run in Law and Order and had just done a role in Miss Congeniality the same year this film came out. He is the pilot. He's a bit of a hotshot and very cocky. He's a standard kind of leading man actor. I don't think his career ever really took off the way a lot of people were expecting that it would, but he is a solid actor, and he does a good job here. We meet Quinn Birchinall, who is like the science guy, and he's a geneticist. This is Tom Sizemore. He is a character actor, like powerhouse of the 1990s. True Romance, Natural Born Killers, Saving Private Ryan, Heat. He is a really fantastic character actor who is known to have his personal demons in terms of, addiction issues, and could sometimes be difficult to work with. And that kind of fits in with his character. Birchinall is like I said, he's a geneticist. He's very cynical. He thinks the whole mission is a waste of time. He thinks that human extinction is inevitable. And you kind of wonder why he's even on this mission. Probably because he's also quite a bit of a narcissist. We have Simon Baker as Pettigill, Chip Pettigill, who is a terraforming expert. He is kind of weak-willed. He's easily spooked. He's a civilian. He's going to crack under pressure. He is played by, like I said, Simon Baker. Australian actor. At this point, was not well known. He had a small role in LA Confidential. He would later on become more well known for the TV series The Mentalist. Also with a pretty significant role in the movie Margin Call, which is a great movie, one of my favorite films. We have our old friend Terrance Stamp, who we saw in Young Guns. He is playing Bud Chantillis, who is kind of the senior philosopher scientist of the mission. He also brings like kind of a spiritual perspective to the mission. He's kind of moved off of hard science and into science as philosophy. And Terrance Stamp, obviously, acting royalty. General Zod from Superman. He was a limey. Like I said, we saw him in Young Guns. Fantastic actor. And then finally we have Robbie Gallagher, who is the engineer on the ship, as they call him, the space janitor. He's just a regular guy. He's a mechanic. He just fixes things. He's cynical, brilliant. He really kind of grounds the team. This is Val Kilmer, who we saw in Top Gun and Thunderheart. Undeniably one of the most talented actors of his generation. The Dorm, Tombstone, Heat. But he has a reputation, and he is right in the middle of it at this point, of being difficult to work with. He's coming off Batman Forever and The Saint, and there are stories of him being just very combative with directors and co-stars, and we are going to see that there's some of that going on in this film. We'll talk about that as we get towards the end of the film. So we spent like the first 15, 20 minutes of the film on their ship called the Mars One, which is en route to Mars, and just kind of getting to meet the characters and find out what their dynamics are going to be. Like, for instance, we know that Stanton, he's also very narcissistic. He's much of a hotshot. He's really concerned about, like, he calls them web hits. I guess today we would probably call them likes or views or clicks. But he's very interested in, like, his online engagement and how many fans he has and what people think about him. Chantillis he's kind of the spiritual guru who is really kind of questioning, like, the greater purpose of the mission. And I think he really believes in it. He has this conversation with Gallagher, who is, much more of a pragmatist. And he talks about, like, the why of why they're doing this.
We didn't try. We just finished poisoning the Earth, and everyone was dead in 100 years. Then what was the point of any of it? Art, beauty, all gone. The Greeks, the Constitution, people dying for freedom, ideas.
Pettigill doesn't really have much of a character. He's just kind of like the milquetoast guy and just kind of sits in the background a lot. Obviously, that personality trait's going to become more important later in the film. We have Gallagher, who is, like I said, much of a pragmatist, very hands-on guy. We meet Amy, who is, I don't want to say his robot, it's the mission's robot. Amy is a military robot who's been given over to NASA to use on this mission. It's very important we remember that she is a military robot first. because that will become important later. That's an important seed that they're planting. And her job is to navigate on Mars. That's why they're bringing her along. But we also see that Gallagher and Bowman, it's the 90s, guys. In early 2000s, we have to have that, you're hot, I'm hot, let's be hot together kind of sexual tension going on. So there is definitely, they're playing that will they, won't they game with Gallagher and Bowman.
Hey, could you pass me the towel, please?
Sure. Sorry.
Just pretend I'm your sister.
I have 2 sisters. They don't look like you.
This only works if we both believe it doesn't matter.
So I should pretend you're Birchnell.
Well, you could make it matter more than that.
We find out a couple of interesting things about how, the younger generation is blaming the older generation for destroying the planet. We find out that there's no frogs left on Earth, which is kind of an interesting little tidbit. We see there's a scene where Bernthal and Gallagher have made a still, and they're making moonshine, and Bowman catches them, but she lets them have it, and she goes along with them. And then there's a little scene where we're kind of we're sitting around the table, and they're drinking, and Pettingill's passed out, and we find out, now we get an insight into Birchnell, and we kind of get a sense of his narcissism and self-importance.
Let's forget all the hypotheticals for a second, okay? I say, to hell with humanity. I say, Commander Bowman, when we get to Mars, we just take it. We just take it over for ourselves.
Call Earth, tell them it sucks, and don't bother coming?
Yeah, whatever keeps out the riffraff. Chantillis, you can do the religion thing. You, Gallagher, you can keep the Space John working, and Pettingill's passed out, and I can handle pretty much everything else, King.
What about me?
Well, you'll be my queen.
We find out that there's been a pre-mission and that there's a habitat set up on Mars for them, very much like we would see later in The Martian. And so the mission is that they're going to get to Mars, they're going to get in orbit, they're going to go down to Mars, they're going to camp out in the habitat, and they're going to try to figure out what's going on with the algae and why the oxygen levels are dropping. When there is a disaster and they are hit by a solar flare and a gamma burst, and there's a lot of throwing technical terms around without a whole lot of really them being grounded in things. But the ship is damaged, and the crew has to go into a safe space in the ship to ride out the gamma burst, but then they find out the engines aren't working, and the ship is leaking, and there's fire, and so Bowman decides she's going to send them down.
Yeah, Bowman, we copy. We're all okay. What's the damage to the ship?
Oh, we're dead in the water.
Main power unit offline.
She's holding it together now, but she could fall apart at any moment.
Auxiliary power unit failure. Power levels still dropping. Primary systems will shut down in 6 minutes.
Change of plans, boys. We're launching now. Suit up. I'll secure the ship. I'm gonna try to get more systems online, and then I'll join.
And that she is going to stay behind and try to fix Mars 1, and the rest of the crew is going to go down in a lander, and they're going to land on Mars. And I guess they have a second lander because she says she's going to join them later. And so now we have this whole sequence of the ship going down to Mars and losing its stability and losing its navigation controls, and they kind of crash on Mars. The ship's got these big balloons, which is actually how they landed a couple of the landers on Mars. They had these balloons that inflated, and it kind of helped it to soft land. So they finally wind up landing on Mars and find out that Chantillis is injured, and so he's going to slow them down. So he decides that he's going to stay behind, and now they have to go figure out how to find the hab.
Locating hab is what matters.
Exterior atmosphere indicators disabled.
I think we're somewhere downrange.
Calculating landing ellipse.
Based on our last uncorrupted nav state, I'd say we're somewhere in this 60 by 120 kilometer ellipse.
All the mission data is in here. We just got to close in on the downrange variables. It's about the math.
This is it. That moment they told us about in high school where one day algebra would save our lives. Shut up.
One important thing to notice that I only really noticed on the rewatch is when they're in the sequence where they're crashing and the computer is yelling out, different things that's going on, stability control. It also mentions that the external atmospheric indicator is broken, and that is a little bit of a plant as well. So they figure out that they only have like 7.5 hours of air. They're going to go and try to find Amy and unpack Amy. But they can't because they had jettisoned the landing gear and she's off kind of far away from them, so they're kind of stuck. And so they all set off to find their way to the hab. So we cut to Amy, and Amy is unpacking herself, and she starts to set out, and we get a little bit of glitching going on with her, but she starts to move, and now our guys get to the hab. There's this cut of Bowman is up in the ship, and she's trying to locate the hab, and the guys are walking up, and they finally get to the spot where it is, and we kind of all figure out at the same time that the hab is destroyed, utterly destroyed, and they don't know what it could have been. It couldn't have been weather because it could withstand hurricanes on Earth, so it could withstand any kind of weather on Mars. They don't know what's happening, but they know that there's no food and no oxygen, and they're basically screwed. And we see them as they're walking. There's this long shot of them walking, and you can see in the bottom of the screen some kind of movement. You don't really know what it is, but it's giving you kind of creepy vibes that there's something moving on the surface of Mars. Then we have Bowman reports back to Houston with what's going on with that.
Houston, this is Mars 1. We have experienced a massive proton field upset sequel to a solar flare. Mars 1 systems at below 70%, orbital path degraded by fire control air purge. Engine function 0. MEV launched with a crew of 5. I have visual on crash site. I can see 1 person down. I have absolutely no radio contact with them. Houston, visuals confirm that HAB 1 is Tango uniform. I repeat, HAB 1 has been destroyed.
So Pettengill and Stanton get kind of separated, and Pettengill is trying to, one, they're standing on the edge of a cliff, and then Pettengill is trying to, kind of make amends with Stanton or kind of settle things between them, and Stanton is just being the same arrogant idiot that he always is, and Pettengill, I guess the stress is getting to him, and he pushes Stanton off the cliff. And then he comes back to the guys, and he's like, oh, Stanton jumped off the cliff. And I don't think either one of them believed that. But they're facing the bigger problem in that they don't know what's going on, what happened to the algae. And now, because we don't know as the audience, you wind up with Birchenall giving this exposition about how they're terraforming Mars and what's supposed to be happening.
Mars's polar ice is mostly CO2. We use low-order nuclear detonations to melt the ice. That releases CO2. CO2 buildup creates a greenhouse effect. Mars starts to warm up. Now, when it's hot enough, we feed down some algae. Now, the algae grows and emits oxygen.
But now these guys are running out of oxygen, and we have this really troubling scene of Gallagher basically suffocating in his helmet because, he's using the most oxygen, so he ran out first, but these guys are listening to him suffocate, but they know they're only a couple of minutes away from that for themselves. Gallagher finally, in this last desperate thing, just pushes the button on his helmet and opens up his helmet, and he discovers that he can breathe. And then the other guys open up their helmet and they discover that they can breathe, which is impossible. The oxygen levels were dropping. There's no way there should be enough atmosphere for them to breathe, but there is. Houston doesn't know that, and Bowman doesn't know that. So Houston basically orders Bowman, is like, look, you come around and you haven't contacted them, then we're going to relight the engines and we're going to get you home. And so the clock is ticking on that. And so now you have this cut back and forth between Bowman working on the ship and the guys on the surface deciding they're going to go find the rover because there's a radio in the rover. And then Amy shows up and she's damaged. And they decide that they can use Amy's innards or her radio or her control of the drone. And so they're going to take it out of her, which Gallagher says will kill her. And she goes into combat mode and she injures Birchnall. And Gallagher explains why she didn't kill him, why she only injured him.
Crash must have flipped her. Why did she turn on us? Tried to kill her. Made us the enemy. Son of a bitch. You okay? Then override her. That's right, she won't respond. It's a broken rib.
Oh, tell me something I don't know, like why she let us live. She had us.
She's playing war games. Guerrilla tactics. It's an old trick. Wound one of the enemy, the others have to help out. Slows them down.
So now the ship's ready to go. Bowman has got the ship ready to go, and the computer, Lucille, is telling her that they're ready for launch. Meanwhile, the guys find the rotor, the guys find the rover, and they start to take the rover apart to get the radio parts out of it. And now, Bowman's literally in the suit, in the seat, ready to fire up the engines. The launch sequence is going, or the ignition sequence is going, and these guys pull the radio out and they get the radio working, and now they're trying to call her.
Does it work?
I don't know, the little green light's on.
Houston, Mars 1, I've acquired elliptical orbit. I'm commencing engine ignition sequence for Earth return.
This is Mars 1 ground crew, do you copy? This is Mars 1 ground crew, do you copy? This is Mars 1 ground crew, do you copy? Hello? We're the guys on Mars.
Come on, someone talk to us. Let's try it again.
This is Mars 1 ground crew, do you copy? This is Mars 1 ground crew, do you copy?
Maybe they'll hear us back in 1997.
But she doesn't hear them because they're using a frequency that Mars 1 doesn't operate on. But Houston hears it, and then they tell her to change her radio and listen. Then she finds out they're actually still alive on the planet. So that, obviously, now that's going to change everything. So she cancels the ignition burn, and they come up with this plan that there's a Russian probe or something. There's a Russian lander that they can use that's supposed to launch samples back up into orbit, so they can use that to get back up to Mars 1. So this is the plan that they start working on, is this Russian probe. And the guys start having this conversation about spiritual things, and Birchnall, always the scientist, is not having any of it.
The facts. Bet you're no fun at Christmas. Bet your mom told you there's no tooth fairy when you were 4.
I'm a geneticist. I write code, okay? A, G, T, P, in different combinations. Hacking the human genome, okay? I choose what, I choose where, and either your kidneys work or you grow a 6th finger. I do that. Now, you spot God, you let me know. Until then, I'll trust my PhDs.
I don't think his ego has room for God. So they figure out that the Russian probe is 30 kilometers away. It'll take him 19 hours to get there. Pettengill thinks he sees some movement out of the corner of his eye, but nobody else sees it, and they start heading out to the Russian probe. So Bowman gets on a private channel with Gallagher and tells him that the probe will only hold 2 people, that there's a storm coming, and we see Amy is like kind of pacing around, and she's in tactical mode, and she's following them, and they find some shelter for the night and to ride out the storm. And Gallagher tells them about Cosmos and that, which is the probe, and that only hold 2 people, and he says he's going to stay behind. Pettengill winds up going on this kind of tangent, probably from guilt, about trust.
Probably won't even launch. It is Russian after all. I'll get 10 feet off the ground and explode, and I'll still live longer than both of you. You're a rare man, Gallagher. But somehow I don't quite believe it. What are you talking about? He thinks I'm responsible for Stanton's death. What do you think, Gallagher? Gallagher? You trust me?
But anyway, so Houston is trying to get Bowman to leave because they don't think this plan is going to work. And Pettengill, in the meantime, takes the radio and sets off on his own to find the probe. But Amy finds him first, and she attacks him, and she kills him. And Gallagher and Birchenough are kind of following him, heading for the probe, and they come across his body, which is in the middle of a field of algae, and they figure out that this area's got algae in it, and then they discover these bugs that are at this point, they're feeding on Pettengill's body, and he calls them nematodes, and he says that this is the answer to their problem.
Thought there wasn't any life here. I was wrong. What? Where there's water and air, there's life.
You're so smart to take those things with us.
Smart? You don't get how important this is, huh?
I'm the janitor, remember?
Hey, Earth's losing oxygen. Did you see how those things burn? They make it. They eat algae and they make O2. I finally get it. I told you I'd solve this damn thing.
But meanwhile, Birchenough, who's already wounded, he's dripping blood from the wound that Amy gave him, and the nematodes are coming at him, and they can eat right through the metal they can eat right through the suit, which is what they did that in the Pettengill suit. And so he knows he's done. And so he collects a sample of them, and he gives it to Gallagher, and then he drops a torch on them, and they will ignite and explode. And so it sets off this huge explosion, which Bowman sees from orbit. She winds up being able to get in contact with him because he's got the radio back now, and she tells him to keep going. And so he gets the Cosmos, and she walks him through the setup, and she walks him through how to reconfigure it, but then he finds out that there's not enough battery power left to ignite the engines. And she's trying to get him to come up with something, and he can't really think about anything because he's stuck on Mars.
Gallagher?
Battery's dead. There's not enough power to launch. Not enough power to launch.
Is there anything else there that you can use?
I don't know. Let me look around, see if I see any alternate high voltage sources. No? It's just rocks. I'm gonna die on this planet.
I'm going to figure out how to stay up.
So he tells her about the nematodes, and he tells her about that this may be like the savior, that they have to send more people down. But meanwhile, Amy shows up, and so Gallagher figures out that she's got a power cell. So he kind of sets a booby trap for her. He makes a bomb out of some of the fuel from the probe, and he is able to disable Amy and get her power cell, launch the probe, go up into orbit, very similar to the end of The Martian, and Bowman gets him. They rendezvous with the ship, and now they're on their way back to Earth with the sample with the nematodes, and everything's going to be okay. And then there's this end narration, which kind of sums everything up.
Nothing went the way it was supposed to. But the team, mankind at its best and its worst, accomplished the mission. Maybe Chantillis was right. Maybe it isn't just the science. I sure don't know. But whatever forces were at work, we triumphed. And me? I've got 6 months before we get home. I guess I'll get to know the janitor.
And that is Red Planet. Look, it's not the greatest movie, but it's not awful. It really is not awful. It's an afternoon watch, which is what this podcast is all about, is finding these old gems that are watchable. And this is definitely that. So this movie, it opened on November 10th, 2000. That was an awful release date. It was directly against Charlie's Angels, which was a huge cultural phenomenon at the time. It also opened against Men of Honor, and it did not stand a chance. It was 5th place at the box office on its opening weekend. The budget was $75 million, at least that was the official budget. It was probably closer to $80 million. And it did $17.4 million in domestic and $15.9 million overseas for a total of $33 million against a $80 million budget. So not good. Critics did not like it very much. It has a 14 on Rotten Tomatoes. It's got a 34 on Metacritic. And it's got a C on CineScore. One of the biggest things that critics hated was Amy. They didn't like the killer robot. They thought it was just completely unnecessary, and that it really kind of clashed with like the traditional hard sci-fi setup that the movie had. They didn't like the CGI for Amy. I didn't think the CGI for Amy was all that bad. And then there was a lot of talk about the chemistry of the cast not being there. And I get that. I mean, Simon Baker, he might as well have not really been there. Terrance Stamp, I love Terrance Stamp, but he didn't really seem all that invested in it. Nobody really seemed all that invested in it. I completely did not buy this sexual tension, quote unquote, between Bowman and Gallagher. The only one who really seemed there to play was Tom Sizemore. And he got into a big feud with Val Kilmer. Now, they had been in a movie before. They had been in Heat, and they were reportedly, when they showed up, they were friends. But whatever happened between the two of them, and Kilmer is, he's notoriously hard to get along with. Sizemore, probably not much better. It just got so bad that apparently they came to blows on the set. They would refuse to be on the set with each other, so there's a lot of body doubles and a lot of, Sizemore does his bits, and then he leaves, and then Kilmer comes in and does his bits. Owen Patterson, who's the production designer, he gave an interview recently where he said that dealing with Sizemore was a handful, but dealing with Kilmer was a handful times a billion. The only person who seemed to like this film at the time was Roger Ebert. He gave it 2.5 stars, which is not great, but it's better than 14% on Rotten Tomatoes. He liked the fact that it focused on the characters and that they were trying to think their way out of a problem. He said, like in 1950s sci-fi, the story's strong point isn't psychological depth or complex relationships, but brainy scientists trying to think their way out of a box that grows smaller every minute. I think that's right on the money. It's not a great film, but it is an attempt to make a different kind of movie. And yeah, it fails more than it succeeds, but it's not for lack of trying. I mean, it's got some good stuff going for it. First, it looks great. Peter Szczynski, his cinematography is incredible. Val Kilmer, he's good. He's not at his peak, but he's good. I think Sizemore is actually really good in this. And third, I just like the sci-fi in it. The idea of terraforming, the pre-mission with the Hab, the nematodes, the algae thing. Like, I think it actually was probably a little early for the execution of the concept, but I think the concept was pretty solid. Anyway, that's it for the 2000 Mars dud that was Red Planet. Thanks for sticking around. And I hope that this was informative, and I hope it makes you want to watch it, because it's actually, I think, worth watching. With all its flaws, I think it's actually worth watching. So thank you. If you're listening to this on YouTube, we appreciate that. Click subscribe and like, and check out some of our shorts. And we have some new YouTube dedicated content coming out. If you're on Spotify, we appreciate you, and be sure to tell all your friends about us. Be sure to listen to the main show. Be sure to listen to our Game of Thrones universe stuff. Another season of House of the Dragon is coming, and Justin and I are getting ready to go back to Westeros. So thanks for listening, and we will catch you next time.